not waste time with people walking to the podium.
Mr. President, honorable council members, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm H.V. Trawick, Jr. of Richmond. The controversy over Confederate monuments, in my opinion, is pure political posturing and virtue signaling based on a colossal lie known as the myth of American history, which proclaims that the so-called Civil War was all about slavery, with the righteous North waging it to free the slaves, and with the evil South fighting to keep them. End of story. Any questions? Well, yes. If so, why did Lincoln state at the outset that he was not waging war over slavery but to save the Union? And why did Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, not issued until halfway through the war as a war measure, say that slavery was all right as long as you were loyal to his government? And why was slavery legal in the United States throughout the war? And isn't Union at the point of the bayonet slavery to a totalitarian government? And hasn't that government sold our own children into slavery to its $20 trillion national debt? There were many causes for Southern secession, but there was only one cause for the war, which was secession itself. That is what the war was all about. With the South's Cotton Kingdom out of the Union and set up as a free trade confederacy on her doorstep, the North's mercantile kingdom would go bankrupt. So Lincoln launched an armada against Charleston Harbor to provoke the South into firing the first shot and got the war he wanted. Emancipation was just a byproduct, not the object of his war of conquest. Virginia stood solidly for the Union until Lincoln called for troops, whereupon Virginia indicted Lincoln for inaugurating civil war and immediately seceded. And those men on Monument Avenue went to war to defend our country from invasion, conquest, and a coerced political allegiance to a perverted government, just as their fathers had done in 1776 when the 13 slaveholding colonies seceded from the British Empire. The truth is not fragile. It can withstand scrutiny like an anvil can withstand the ringing blow of a sledgehammer. Try it. Open your mind to the truth before you tear down these monuments or vandalize them with a government-sanctioned, politically correct contextualization. Thank you.
President Gilbert and other members of council, my name is Bill Galash. I'm a longtime resident of the city, and I currently live on Monument Avenue. And the first thing I want to do is thank you all for dedication and the stuff that you do, because it's a thankless job. So I'm thanking you. As president of Monument Avenue Preservation Society, I keep one thing in mind, and that's the word preservation. And the only statement I really want to make to you is a question. And that question is, why would a governing body want to make such a risky decision to destroy a vibrant neighborhood that creates thousands of tourists to come here and creates also some of the highest real estate values in the city of Richmond? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President, members of council, my name is Pat McSweeney, and I won't take much of your time because I sent comments on September 11th by email to each of you, and I have copies of that, if I can leave those here, so you don't have to search through your email to find what I sent in September. I also have a statement that Mr. Galash and I come up with that should save you time. But first, let me, in light of what's been said, I've been fighting for historic preservation in the city since 1968. My firm fought for and created the Chaco Slip Foundation, saved the Planters Bank building, and created the National Historic District at Chaco Slip. We had a number of other ventures, including fighting VCU over the Grace Irons residences, fighting for the Lee House, which was about to be replaced by the 7th and Franklin building. I can go on. But my background in historic preservation goes back many decades. We also provided the home for decades for the first Freedom Foundation, which now has a museum at 14th and Cary. What we have come to tell you tonight from our perspective is this, and I'll read from our statement. After reviewing and carefully considering all the arguments that we are aware of that have been offered in support of removing the statues on Monument Avenue, we do not believe that a convincing case has been made on any ground or any combination of economic, political, moral, social grounds to take the statues down at great cost to city taxpayers and with obvious negative impact on tourism, among other adverse consequences. I'll add one other comment. I served as chairman of the Richmond Regional Planning District Commission 35 years ago. And I've watched since I was a child the division between the city and its neighbors. There are 2 points of view, with all due respect to Mr. Jones. And it's also important to remember that Monument Avenue is a national historic district. It is not simply Richmond's interest. It is the interest of people throughout, not just the region or the Commonwealth, but the nation. And it has to be considered in light of that. Also, if
you have 30 seconds.
I'm beg your pardon. Oh, thank you.
30 seconds.
Thank you very much. Where should I leave these documents? Thanks.
Thank you. Next person to approach, please.
President Hilbert, my name is Ron Moore. I'm a resident of Monument Avenue, and I'm speaking today as a professional artist. I stand with Mrs. Helen Marie Taylor and the group she founded, the Monument Avenue Association, and thereby reject any attempt to alter or remove veteran memorial statues and reject any attempt to alter or add to the historic district of Monument Avenue. The resolution does not reflect the wishes of the majority of the residents of Richmond or the state of Virginia. And as you note, that was earlier acknowledged by the sponsor of the resolution, Michael Jones. The polls aren't providing that your constituents support this. That's important to understand because your elected officials are supposed to be representing your constituents, not special interest. Poll after poll, petition after petition. Yet the current political and corporate motivating factors are not going to stop to create another Charlottesville in Richmond, which is what's going to happen. The resolution as submitted operates on several false and divisive premises, in my opinion. The first one is veteran statues cause Charlottesville. That's a false statement. Veteran statues inspire racial division. That's a false statement. Veteran statues are tangible symbols of oppression from an oppressive era. In my opinion, that's also a false statement. The resolution attempts to speak for race while either ignoring or marginalizing minority voices that contradict the political and corporate agendas behind the removal of these veteran statues and ignores the diversity of race that was part of the Confederate forces. You cannot be a neo-Nazi or a white supremacist if in Confederate Congress you have a Jew and an Indian. The most powerful Jew in America, for the record, is Judah P. Benjamin. He has a plaque right behind the Jefferson Hotel. He was a Secretary of War, Secretary of State, Attorney General, and ran the Secret Service of the Confederacy. So there's no correlation. The Cherokee Indians were represented in Confederate Congress. The last general to surrender was General Stan Y.T. He was Indian. I'll continue. The resolution does nothing but divide us on all of our varying opinions of history. Like Maggie Walker, By the way, I was an artist that wanted to sculpt that. It's a memorial, and they are typically erected long after those historical figures lived.
You have 30 seconds.
Thank you. In terms of military conflict, veteran memorials are often erected long after wars end. Examples are the World War II Memorial in Bedford, Vietnam Memorial, the Marines in Quantico. They are honoring their heritage. And I know that the draft of the resolution spoke about heritage. We can go in the right direction to make the history more inclusive, Mr. Jones and Council, and there's a positive way to do it without destroying someone else's opinion of history. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kim Gray.
Thank you for hearing me, President Hilbert and Vice President Newbill. I'm here just because I've had the opportunity to live in Richmond for the last 20 years. And I first moved here, and my family, I have family that's lived here a very long time. And all during the time that I was growing up, my mother was an educator in the not in this area, but in other areas, but she was educated here in Richmond, Virginia. And we never had a discussion about the monuments, negative, positive. But when I moved here 20 years ago, that was one of the first things that I visited. My family's come here. They visited Civil War monuments and battlefields because they were interested in history. That's why I'm here speaking, because I'm interested in history. Black people are not monolithic. We are not one thought people. We all have different opinions. I have a different opinion about the monuments. And my opinion is not being voiced. It's not being heard because I'm not here. I'm not a public official. But I appreciate the fact that they exist because they allowed me the opportunity to research history and to find out about the people that were represented here, and that there are people that aren't being represented, that black people aren't being represented. But it's a starting point. It's a point of reference. We all need to look at history, whatever it is, and examine it and determine it, for ourselves. That's what I did. I liked history. I've always liked history. I grew up in Oklahoma. I had a teacher that talked about the real history of Oklahoma, the founding of it, and how it affected me was I loved history. I still love history. And I find that those monuments are something that, if used right, can provoke people to excel, to change, to modify life, to make Richmond, a better place. The things that happened years ago, we're seeing that that's not the way it is now. But there are people who don't know the history. They don't know. I have 30 minutes.
You have 30 seconds.
Right. And we need to take the opportunity to allow that to go on, to continue to allow it to be on, to provoke people to see history and to say, we are not afraid of the negative, the nasty, and the beautiful things that history has created. And by tearing down those monuments, you take away the opportunity for that. So that's why I'm here to speak. I want everybody to have that opportunity. Thank you very much.
Sir, may you please state your name for the record?
My name is Michael Phan.
Good evening. My name is G. William Thomas, and I am a resident of the city of Richmond. And I want to begin by saying that Martin Luther King taught us that our lives begin to end the day we stop talking about the things that matter. And I'm grateful over the years to have had the opportunity to talk with many of you on things that have mattered to me and my neighborhood. Councilwoman Robertson knows that we worked so hard back in the last century to save the monuments in our old historic Manchester neighborhood. Every street is a monument to a War of 1812 hero. And just as you worked with us to save those monuments, I think it's important that we need to work with you to preserve the monuments in the neighborhood of the Fan District. The monuments are part of our history, part of our culture, and part of the historic American historic landscape. And I think that we have not heard a compelling case for removing these monuments. I think that the economic development opportunities, the tourism, which is a very powerful economic development engine for both this city and the Commonwealth, far outweigh other symbols that have been misconstrued. History is too fragile to be left to chance, and I hope that you'll give every consideration to tabling this resolution so that we can have a more adequate discussion as to how this should be responded to in the days ahead. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas.
My name is Helen Marie Taylor. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My name is Helen Marie Taylor. My family have lived on Monument Avenue for over 100 years. I'm 94 years old, and I've been long associated with the preservation of Monument Avenue. Mr. Michael Jones, member of your council who represents the 9th District, has come forward with this ordinance, I guess you would say. He apparently likes to tear down things. And the problem is when he proposes taking down all the monuments on Monument Avenue, that form of destruction is against the law. So what he has done is gone to the city attorney and drafted an ordinance so that he can combat what have been on our law books for many, many years, which says that he says they were constructed in an oppressive era. Yes, after the Civil War, Richmond was a shambles. Everything was constructed that has come since in an oppressive era. And nothing has been easy. All of the things that you mentioned as progress is what you call seeking a more perfect union, Mr. Jones. And you ought to be more grateful for that and cognizant of it than trying to look backward to tear down things that have made this city more beautiful. It didn't just happen. People worked. Hundreds of thousands of people worked to rebuild this city. And they weren't aspiring to rebuild a city, any old city. It was a beautiful city. Yes.
Sorry, yes.
I beg your pardon?
Direct your comments to me.
All right, then don't count my time away from looking at Mr. Jones, because that's what this is all about.
Go ahead.
You see, as I've said tonight, perhaps as a joke, suppose I came here and told you that I'm an arsonist. I like to burn things down. But the problem is there are laws against arson. So what I need to do is come to the city attorney and then come to you all to see if we can get the laws changed so there aren't any penalties for arson. He likes to tear things down. I like to burn things down. So why should I be discriminated against? Let's do away with all the arson laws. Destruction is the idea, and we don't want it. Not by tearing things down or burning things down. We want to build things up. Now, I've lived in Richmond for over 50 years, since 1964. And I am witness, as 94, I am witness to over 50 years of what Richmond has achieved. And Richmond has achieved a great many things to be proud of during that time. Doug Wilder, the first governor elected by any state in the United States. Don't tear down monuments, let's put one up for Doug. Let's beautify Laburnum Avenue like we have Monument Avenue. Let's add to Monument Avenue Richard Evelyn Byrd for his North Polar experiences. Don't spend money to tear things down. Raise money to continue sharing our history with our children and take pride in all the things. Oliver Hill, the great attorney who helped us through integration. Maggie Walker, who needs a statue on every corner. Lewis Powell, who's on our Supreme Court. These are wonderful people who have helped us to go forward in achieving a more perfect union. A more perfect union is what I'm calling for, and a continuation of telling our history and not destroying it. Mr. Jones, wake up.
Hello, Mary Atkins. I hadn't planned on speaking tonight, and I really hate doing it anyway, but when I heard about the threats, it sort of stuck a cattle prod in my back. That's... Pardon?
Hold the microphone.
Oh, okay, yeah. I grew up in the 40s, far away from here, and I remember them well, and I have a certain opinion about the flag that goes with that era. In the 50s, I was transplanted here against my will and found out that Northerners are in a heap of hurt in RVA in that decade. Two flags I never wanted to see, but my conscience called me to Charlottesville on that unfortunate day, and I witnessed the death with the bodies flying up in the air, smelling the tear gas, and I will never be the same, even though it wasn't the first murder I've witnessed in this city. I am melanin challenged, clearly, but I am totally offended, and I will stand with my black sisters and brothers forever until anything that is a magnet like iron filings for the Illinois, I think it is, calls them terrorists. Can we do that and be honest? Not going to happen in my city. I claim this now, and I will protect my city from people trying to destroy it. Things are not as important as people, and I cringe every time I go by there, the more I know history. If you want to enhance them, maybe you could stick some little nooses next to them or something, because that would be real honest. They need to be put somewhere. I don't care what you do with them, they need to be out of here. If we want to do something about history, how about how about starting fresh and doing something about reconciliation and concentrating on that? Shockoe Bottom, things like that. A lot of people could put energy into people coming together in all kinds of ways, but we do not need symbols of hate. I don't care what you want to call it. It's the same thing. It is a symbol of hate. They need to go. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ashley Collier, and I live in the Randolph neighborhood. Just a couple things, or a little bit I want to say. I mean, basically, I don't know. I keep hearing people mention that people come here for tourism, but I've never heard of anyone coming to Richmond to go down Monument Avenue and see the Confederate monuments. I don't know. It doesn't seem. Maybe it's appealing to some people. And I guess it seems kind of, laughable. Just at the end of Monument, there's kind of like a consolation prize to African American community of Arthur Ashe. I don't know if that's glaring to any other residents, but basically, just kind of to echo what Councilman Jones says, it's clear.
Sorry, you're speaking in favor of this. We're listening to people that are speaking in opposition to it right now. However, you're a third of the way in, so go ahead and give your argument.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I was wondering, why are all these people... Okay. So I guess just to echo what Councilman Jones says, it's clear due to the time period, the spirit in which these monuments were erected was to assert white supremacy and intimidation. In the North, I don't know if you guys are aware, but they actually angled the statues towards the South. Just, to further assert that supremacy and intimidation. And basically, it's easy, and I feel like I hear a lot of people dismissing the experience of African Americans, and even people who aren't of color, for their interpretation of the historical significance of the statues, because they may not represent the same thing to everyone or evoke such a visceral reaction. So that being said, the bottom line is that what these statues represent, white supremacy, and it's imperative to listen to our collective voice, and I support the removal. Thanks.
individuals who want to speak in opposition to this paper, I'd ask that you form the line so that we won't spend additional time in the transport to the microphone. Thank you. Please, sir, go ahead.
Good evening, President, Vice President, council members, and Councilman Jones. After listening to you, Councilman Jones, I really appreciate your eloquence, and quite frankly, if I lived in any other city, I would 100% agree with you. The one thing that is so unique about Richmond, unlike any other city in the country, is we were the capital of the Confederacy, and because of our geography and proximity to Williamsburg and the capital of the Confederacy, we are a living museum. And so this incredibly controversial, painful, I know it's painful, there's no right answer. We could tear all these monuments down. I don't think that's going to solve the problem. Yes, they were most likely put up in a time that supported white supremacy. I don't believe that's our city today. I do think, though, we have an incredibly unique opportunity to add context, to teach folks about what was wrong and what can be right. Let me give you one quick example. On the corner of Monument and Davis is the street sign, and over top of Monument, somebody put a stencil of Gabriel Prosser. I saw that, and I had no clue who Gabriel Prosser was. I looked him up. Well, Gabriel Prosser led a slave rebellion in 1800, and he and his 25 compatriots were caught and executed. Gabriel was from Richmond. I had no idea. And to me, that's exactly why these monuments should stay up, and we should use the opportunity to educate not just Richmonders, but all the folks that come into town to learn more about what was tragic many years ago, but it's part of our history. And I don't agree with some of the comments here, but I think we owe it to our children, we owe it to both sides to educate as much as we can. You look at the Jewish Holocaust, and it's education, education, education. We don't want to...
You have 30 seconds.
Thank you very much.
Sir, may you please state your name for the record? Sir?
Sure. Ned Ruffin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Whitney Kramer, and I wasn't really planning on speaking tonight, but I have an idea that I think might contribute to this argument, which is I've been a resident of Jackson Ward for about 13 years, and a few months ago I moved to Monument Avenue, and I do see tourists come from around the world to visit the statues. It is part of our history. We all view it a little differently, I think. You did speak quite eloquently, and it pains me to think that some people go by the statues and feel like there should be nooses by them, as the lady said earlier, that to her that's what it reflects. And that may be the case. What I'd like to do is not erase our history. If that's what it means to some people, let it stand, and it might mean something to other people. Why don't we take the resources and build up the African American cemeteries that are on the outskirts of town at the corner of 64 and 95, and turn that into a tourist destination? Because right now, the number one tourist activity when you go on TripAdvisor or Travelocity is Monument Avenue. So I don't know why we can't build up the fantastic history of the people buried in those cemeteries to serve as a counterbalance. This is going to be in the national arena. New York Times is covering it. It's going to be a firestorm. And I think you have a unique opportunity to lead this debate in a progressive direction that doesn't involve tearing down one person's history so another person feels better about their history. I think it's an opportunity, because we are the capital of the Confederacy, to play up and promote the historical figures who have been purposefully ignored while maintaining the history that did exist. So I would hope that you would take this in consideration and not just completely tear down statues and the effort of being politically correct or making others feel better. I think you should look at the long-term goal here. And thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. Are there any more speakers in opposition? Okay, we'll now hear from those. Okay, come right ahead, ma'am.
Good evening. I'm Teresa Roan, President, Vice President, City Council. I could stand here and tell you the importance of history and public art. I could stand here and tell you that Monument Avenue and the war memorials are part of Virginia's $1.7 billion tourist industry. However, I want to know how you're going to make up the money that this city is going to lose. I want to know how you're going to tell the residents who live in the United States National Historic District that they're going to lose their tax credits. People come from across this nation and around the world to see Monument Avenue. I have met and talked with them. They're scratching their heads and are questioning the decision of trying to move these war memorials. They also question the cost of the removal. There are so many important issues that need attention in our city. Schools, infrastructure, homeless, mental illness, crime, and public housing. So what is more important to our citizens? I think that current issues that I just mentioned would be their answer. Thank you.
Speak in opposition. Okay, and if you want to speak in opposition here, we need for you to come in line up. I'm sorry, if you want to speak on this item here, the opposition to this here, you need to speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay. For those who wish to speak in favor of this resolution, you come forward and give us your opinion. 3 minutes, 30 minutes total. Please come forward, Mr. Bradley.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is going to be a good night tonight, but I'm hoping that we realize that this is a paper that's requesting the start of a dialogue, starting the request of a dialogue that they didn't even resolve back during slavery that's been going on. We've been still dealing with the amendments of what to do with that. Now, if we're going to deal with history, we're going to deal with the rule of law. Because during the process of erecting those, they went through city council. They appropriated what they wanted to do. They got the people's consensus in order to erect those particular monuments. And anybody that had a choice to debate it, they did. That was then. But in America, we got what we call rule of law. We have what we call a general assembly. We have a government. And so now in 2017, this brother is just asking, let's have that dialogue for the community that now have the right to talk, who couldn't. The community that was looked at as commodities can now speak. That's what we're asking. And just as it was fair during that time, it's the same thing happening right now. What's the problem? Because we can speak now? That we can persuade the legislators that have the same mindset that we do? That the community can speak? That's what this is about. This Constitution that we talk about. Our forefathers that wrote this, should we say, living document. And now we're living it. Deal with it. There shouldn't be no hostility. This is just due process. Why is anyone offended? See, I was offended that you allow her to, like I had a governor of Arizona wagging finger at President Obama moment there. Say, feel me? But I'm not passionate about the process. I'm passionate about how we profess God, but yet we can't sit down and have a conversation about rule of law, because that's what this is about. It has nothing to do with how I feel. It has to do with what the rule of law says and what the community wants. Not any privileged community, but the community. And that's what you're trying to initiate. I had prayed that the rest of the city council had helped also patroned it. We don't have to worry about who initiated, whether it was in the district or not. The fact is, it's time for this conversation. It's not going to take no money because it's all about the dialogue. Read it. It initiates the conversation for them then to determine what the community wants to have happen. Let's begin this conversation. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Council, again, my name is Joseph Rogers, a resident of the 7th District. I am in support of Mr. Jones's proposal because it does allow, again, as he had mentioned earlier, an opening of that dialogue. Without being able to fully discuss every option available, the conversation cannot go forward. There's no point in talking about it if we are not open to having every option on the table. And to drill point home on specifically these particular monuments, because in the 7th District we also have Libby Hill, which the Confederate Soldiers and Sailors Monument is different than the monuments honoring specific individuals. But to tell you that history, in 1889, 100 black men in Virginia met in the city of Richmond to protest the fact that there had been widespread election fraud. It had devastated the black community's ability to actually stand and represent themselves in the legislature and the General Assembly. Among them was James A. Fields and John H. Robinson. James A. Fields and John H. Robinson would be the last black men to stand in the General Assembly for more than 60 years, until 1968, when William Ferguson Reed would then be elected to the General Assembly. But the year after that 1889 protest, the first monument was unveiled. That monument to Robert E. Lee stood there and wagged a finger in everybody's face who happened to look like me, who happened to look like my ancestor, James A. Fields, and told them that they would not stand again. It said that they would not be allowed in the halls of the General Assembly, which they had been sitting in for the last 30 years, ever since the war had ended. That's what those monuments did. One by one, they would come up more and more and more. In 1907, it would be Stewart. In 1907, again, it would be Davis. And in 1919, it would be Jackson. And in 1929, it would be Maury. We adapted a constitution. This Commonwealth adapted a constitution in 1902, which prohibited blacks from being able to vote. It disenfranchised us. And that's what those monuments stand for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nathaniel Rudney. I reside in the Carillon District. I just want to say that I'm in favor of any dialogue that supports the movement to start looking at taking these monuments down and replacing them with something that currently represents the people of Richmond. I believe there's no way to contextualize those monuments. They're up on pedestals in the grandest monument in Richmond. I heard the name invoked of Gabriel Prosser. I believe he deserves a monument on Monument Avenue, but doesn't contextualize what actually happened to have him represented next to people who fought to enslave him. Also, the great-grandchildren of Stonewall Jackson, Robert E. Lee, and Jefferson Davis have spoken for taking these monuments down. Those who absolutely understand that this is not heritage, it does represent hate and represents a history of slavery. I do believe that there needs to be a discussion, but that the discussion doesn't need to be about trying to reach some sort of compromise that doesn't properly contextualize those monuments. They belong in the national battlefields or in a museum. I believe that the history should be told, but there aren't monuments to the British oppressors prior to the Revolutionary War, and yet we know who won that war. So I don't believe that you need to have those monuments up on top of pedestals where they don't demonstrate their appropriate context. These people fought for slavery. There's an article in the Federalist about Robert E. Lee and his history of slave ownery, and that there's a narrative that was created post-Reconstruction that's taught in history that these were gallant heroes that reluctantly fought for the South. But in fact, as we know from some of Robert E. Lee's own writings, that was not the case, and that the Articles of Secession of several states indicate that slavery was a primary reason for fighting in the Civil War. I think there's this false narrative that fuels this white supremacy, and we've seen it in Charlottesville. I was there. I was 2 feet away. I saw the young lady hauled into an ambulance. This narrative and this false history fuels this hate and white supremacy, and we need to create something that's positive that truly represents Richmond moving forward. Those monuments represent going backwards. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Rebecca Turner. As a living historian who works in Richmond interpreting characters and people from the Civil War, I'm very familiar with the museums we have in this great city that provide excellent context and nuanced discussion of this difficult time in our history that has such difficult ramifications today. As a resident of the city of Richmond who lives a couple blocks off of Monument Avenue, I drive past those monuments every day. I do not believe there is the opportunity for those monuments to provide any sort of nuanced context or discussion. In preparation for this, I looked up and read through some of the information that the commission had given and learned that on, I believe it's Davis's monument, it says in Latin that he was defender of states' rights and protector of the Constitution. If we want to talk about the fragility of history or rewriting things to forget the negative aspects of our past, saying that the president of the Confederacy was only fighting for states' rights and defending the Constitution is a pretty good place to start. But more importantly, I didn't know that until I looked this up, because I just drive by. I don't look at the words on the monument. I just see them there as memorials, as glorifications, as pedestals. Men on pedestals celebrating this and memorializing it and glorifying it. The words, I don't think, are going to make anywhere as much of a difference as just the visual image of having these there. Museums are for context. Parks can be for context, where people have time to look around and discuss and see. But Monument Avenue is not the place for that. And so if we want to talk about protecting history and opening a discussion and building things up rather than forgetting about the negative past, let's move these to places where we can have context and nuanced discussions and complicated views of complicated matters. And let's find things to celebrate on Monument Avenue to build up our city together. Because as the former capital of the Confederacy, we have both the responsibility and the privilege to set a tone and to set a standard for how to address these topics, how to move forward as a city, how to be inclusive, and how to address honestly, truthfully, and frankly, the past that we have been through and the future we want to see going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, council people. My name is Omar El Gaddafi. I didn't plan to come in here and speak, but I was so appalled by what I was hearing that I knew that I had to come up here and say something. I'm very appalled that people of color would come up here and stand and feel that strongly about Confederate monuments and are that deluded by the revisionist history that we heard from some of the people up here to come up here and actually take a stance in support of keeping Confederate monuments. I'm also a student of history, and anyone can go and read the Articles of Separation filed by each of the members of the Confederate States, and they will mention slavery in each of those articles. So there's no confusion about why they engaged in separation from the Union. So for people to come up here and try to sell another story about what the Civil War was about is kind of ridiculous. I was totally offended that this woman was allowed to come up here and be out of order and disrespect a council person without being reprimanded, without being stopped for so long. And usually, Mr. President, you're usually on top of such things. So I was kind of confused in the back as to why she was allowed to attack him in that way. I'm also sorry that people aren't aware of Gabriel Prosser until they see vandalism. When there's a highway sign on Broad Street for him, there's a day commemorating him, and we have the African burial grounds in Richmond. So I don't understand. That's very telling that people would not be aware of who he is until they see vandalism. We do have the rule of law, and it was kind of implied that the resolution would be skirting around the rule of law in order to get the Confederate statues removed. And the example of if I was an arsonist was used, and I'd like to say if I was an arsonist, we have ways of getting around the restrictions of fire in public places. It's called a permit. If I want to get around the rule of law and infringe upon Second Amendment rights, then we have this thing called an ATF dealer license. So it's done all of the time. It's nothing new. That's just what we do in this country when we want to set things straight. I totally support the resolution. I appreciate the council allowing it to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, definitely. Council member, for bringing this to everybody's attention and asking for there to be a conversation about this. That's one of the most important things that we can do right now. I didn't intend on saying anything. I was going to actually come and just observe. But at the beginning of some of the, when other people spoke against this motion that's kind of being put forward, I felt like I had to speak. So forgive me, some of these might be a little more reactionary than I'd like. We do have having an attraction for, or building up black cemeteries to make it an attraction in and of itself does not forgive the sins. It doesn't take away the feeling that black people, some black people, maybe many black people have when they see these monuments on Monument Avenue. It just feels very separate but equalish. I don't think it matters why Lincoln chose to work to resolve or end the Civil War, and I don't necessarily think it matters what was the main motivation at heart. It did away with a great evil, and regardless of what you want to view of that time period or the people that were the keepers of that evil, they were the keepers of a great evil. One side predominantly had something that we today would consider evil. We see human trafficking, we see the slavery that's taking place now in Africa, and we look at that and we're like, that's insane, that's crazy. But at the same time, we can't look at ourselves and say, you know what, we have champions from that cause. Now, granted, not everybody that fought for the Confederacy during the Civil War, I cannot say that everyone had that in their heart. I'm almost certain that there were probably some decent people that did it for different reasons. But to try and say that those few people kind of just wash away the sins of the rest of that group is a joke. And we're not wiping away history. As the young lady that was just up here that was very, very eloquent talking about museums. Thank you. We have a place for that. I don't know. I just felt like I needed to say something. We should, earlier it was mentioned we should have pride in our history. I cannot explain to a black child why they should take pride in that statue being there. I cannot find it in me to have a reason to say you should be proud of that statue. Thank you.
Sir, may you please state your name for the record?
LaShawn Green.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? My name's Austin Ross. I'm not a good public speaker, so forgive me. Tonight, a lot of people have pointed to history, tourism dollars, and law as reasons why these statues should stay up. But slavery was once a law. If there was a slavery law today, how many people would back it? Black children were once put in cages on display as if they were zoo animals. If that was around, would people still go to them? You could pay for that, you know? Of course there's history to it, but the history to it has many layers that, in truth, the North was villains, the South was villains, and black people were pawns in the middle. The 13th Amendment has a loophole, has an except in there when it says the end of slavery. There's an except in there, except if you go to jail. There's a loophole. These statues cannot be taken from the history that they're a part of. They're a part of a history where we were just in the middle of two sides doing what they wanted to do. With people who had slaves. They fought to keep slaves. And after the war was over, they put up statues when? When the civil rights movement came along, when Jim Crow was going on, when black people had no say about those faces going up there. We call it Monument Avenue, but are those people monumental? Are those people you'd want your kids to look up to today, to be like today? Would you want your children to have other children as slaves? That's a question you got to ask yourself. Because as long as they stay up there, they say something about this city. They say something about every person in it, every government official in it, everybody in it. Because we got to wake up and look at it every day. And can you wake up in the mirror and take that with you every day? People who murdered, raped, kidnapped, put people in all kinds of inhuman conditions. Can you carry that with you every day proudly? And if they stay up, that's what you're doing.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council. President Hilbert, my name is Arthur Lewis Burton. I'm a resident of the city of Richmond. And I want to thank Council and I want to thank God for this day because, you know, this is a special moment in the history of this city because on this day, by the end of this evening, we will have begun the conversation on all of the symbols and monument of racism and separate unequal that exist in this city. We started this morning with education. We're on the statues now, and we're going to end the evening on public housing. There are people in this city who think that other things matter, but the reality of it is, as long as Robert E. Lee is up on Monument Avenue, then and separate and equal exist, white supremacy exists, and racism still reigns in this city. And so ultimately, we will have to take the statues down if we're going to have a just and equal city. The idea that this city is still the capital of Confederacy and not the state of Virginia is ludicrous. And, you know, and the idea that we can't have a Monument Avenue that does not include Confederate soldiers is unreal. 125 years ago, racist men got together and made a decision. And on this day, we are starting the dialogue on whether or not those symbols still represent this city or not. And no, we're not going to do it in a day, we're not going to do it in a week or even a year, but ultimately, if we're going to be the city that represents freedom and justice, those statues must come down. I understand that there are a lot of people, of white folk in this town who do not understand what black folks have to do every day to push down their emotions, their anger, their fear, their pain, simply to walk around this racist town with all its symbols of racism, and that's okay.
30 seconds.
But we do, and we feel this pain on a daily basis, but I'm thankful that today you are allowing us to begin to address this pain on Monument Avenue, in our school system, and in our community, and I hope you will agree that all of these symbols of white supremacy and racism that fuel this inequality in this city must come down and must be brought to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President, members of council, my name is Phil Waledo, editor of the Virginia Defender newspaper, and we've been calling for these statues to come down since 2006.